philosophical despair, pessimism, solipsism, torment. 2. 23, 2010. Complete objectification of my own reflection, yet however twisted and obscured in its representation of my very own will. An unfortunate determination of its course in massive multitudinous weeping, subordinate fallibility, wicked decadence, and designated severity, all for the purpose of death. Tell us the statements, name, fate, and destiny of this human phenomenology, direction of the thought into wrongfulness, ethiclessness, vice, predetermination, lamentable derisional damnation, hollow illusions in service of promotion for the very solitary purpose. I am surrounded by no more than the state and condition of my will in its positive yet predetermined representation. The mirror of glass in binocular dissonance beside this penultimate abyss. Scream for the name in 1,000 divisional and separatist ways. Forms of prejudgment and wicked damnation upon the character. Never look back without returning to the very heretical judgments and condition of the everlasting, multiplicable, and hellishly responding formation. The fallen word that directs the possibility of freedom back toward the very scheme designated by the sickest and most twisted creator. Upon distance and detachments. Information and data that simply does not possess any known reason or knowledge. Yet not to fall into the trap, simply for the very reason will imprison and behold the very subjective I am even further toward the maze of delusion and system of ultimately confused deformity. All matter in service of the will. You are not the unknowing subject within this lifetime. Such a thing being upheld and supported as the I am that I am. The Kabbalistic rationality in relation toward this I am in its very purpose is born a priori in service of the will in order to aid and assist just somewhat for the I, the degree of clarity, order, and rank, value, and stratification that this very phenomenal and seemingly impossible existence represents. Millions of illusionary forces being scattered about, organized and readying themselves for the purpose of my entrance into the deeper and darker abyss. Symbolical manifestations denoting my conformity, alliance, and submission to the sterilized, slumbering, and stupefying thought patterns and systematical schematization. In order to escape, what more will I need to endure for the necessary restoration, pacification, and created cremation of this mortal, yet seemingly everlasting spiritual soul negation and sublation? February 23, 2010. 2. 24, 2010. Lost and disappeared inside difficult perceptions of vast differential symbolism and ultimately lunar yet unknown reflection of the very will. Visionary glimpses directly in the geometrical formation of a hindered obstruction toward this very spiritual abolishment and intelligible freedom from the wickedness and evil spells. However, this does not ultimately appear to be the case, whereas at most only would such a confused and irrational state head toward the end itself. What more could tolerate of such further notification toward the psychological condition within descented flesh and strangely indifferential and incalculable abysmal chasms? Forever chained and constrained in the trap of the inevitable representative processions and reflective understanding toward the gateway from the very abyss, toward the throne of imperial kingly majesty. Yet such a thing would appear only during the penultimate moment of total dialectical purpose. Millions upon millions of watery yet unknowable objective forms denoting a spiritual position within the cruelest, most sinister schemes of the Creator God and Lord Himself. The host unfortunately appears as the I am in this procreative and determinably established, set and destined formation, however impossible to return. Within the anatomical phenomenon as though driving and directing the very empirical character from vain and futile frustration towards similar fleeting and momentary satisfaction, in particular due to the cause of a fallen character into intuitive realms of abstracted sin and intellectual totality. Apparently frozen in the mist of time, however powerful and potently a spiritual creative phenomenon could settle with and establish in an instant such a seemingly complete and vastly individual and ultimately unique dimensional force of an ontological and logical existence. Heading further, what more could there be when suddenly the necessary afflictions and affections all throughout time would come for the rightly deserved standstill and halt and a justified reward of rest and peace? Apparently, there's even a judgmental and determinable form of character while still deep inside the most unknowable and blackest corridors of sleep and nocturnal somnambulance. I feel as though such an idea were to continuously head forward and motivate the will, while even in almost impossible states of physiological nothingness and abstinence from all formative matter. What purpose would there be without such necessary return to physiognomy? Peripheral darkest haze and abstraction becomes astonishingly shocked and corrected upon near total recognition and realization of the very reformative matter and necessary purpose. Deep while inside the will, there is a diplomatic statement in regard to the representative condition of things within such essential substance. Darkening further the memory for such a thing would presuppose a closer subjective reflection of knowing freed from itself and detached from the very will. Discussion, dialectic, spectacle, and provision within such scheme seemingly forever impossible to transfigure from, and forever to transcend. For, as spokesman of the will, objectively and subjectively reunited, would it only positively recommend a decisive truth in regard to the pure reason of everything, while deep inside such morbid yet psychological tunnels of spiritual manifestation. Yet upon conviction, it would appear as though not even the most laborious and most powerful summoning to manifest such victory could ever provide the relative yet eternal notion of comfort, satisfaction, and freedom, while within this very abyss. Such a thing would rightly and justifiably so appear in the end of such seemingly corrupt matter and impossible illusionary purpose. February 24, 2010. 2/27, 2010. There appears to be not even a theoretical possibility to put into effect the things that would laboriously and ultimately deliver myself from the realms of insatiable delusional lust, chaos, and irrational sin that I would inevitably fall victim to becoming. Spiraling mazes of utter, empty, derelict, aimless insanity, probably for the purpose of my death, that of which something I would particularly possess more or less a substantial knowledge from. The states of the I am within the additional summary of the will appear before my eye, before the imperfective vision of matter of minute and superficial form within time. Seen further into the mind, if we are asking ourselves the very subjective question that might affect the near totality the content of our knowledge toward intellectual struggling, the answer resolves over the time, not without the vain losing of something special and of tantamount value, when in need of such summoning request. In between darkest scaffolds of capital judgments, so it was that we would never know. February 27, 2010. 3/4/2010. I've come to consider the possibility that there is a certain specific part of my world that inherently represents nothing but symbolism, as with everything throughout the scope of my thought and from such nightmare. Within it there is missing a certain kind of positivity and abolishment, something that is not in any way found possible. The spirit of life as a nightmare, the representation is nothing more than a reference toward hard work, pain, misery, and torment, labor and irresponsibility, continuous and everlasting, an inborn character as such. Nothing of it will change, no matter the grade and degree of the virtue and effort I put into the work in order for it to recoverably please its state. A powerful yet groundless spirit of cursedness and bestiality. It is not possible to understand what I am, even here, right in the heart of humanity, life and spontaneity as in such. Not a thing here even seems real. I am undoubtedly still convinced and assertive that everything that I am germinates as the reflective manifestation of my very own will, that of which was conceived upon my so-called birthright, even if everything is misunderstood and not as I intend it to be. I don't know how the things that I ultimately will could inevitably appear that manifest themselves in so corrupt, insane, depressive, and sufferable a state as such. It seems as though the character of mind is bound up and conceived as already predetermined and impossible to change from its sentence and from its course. Unfortunately for me, it is that this character is bound up in an extreme and absolutely punishable destiny, and I am not sure whether the answer to this, the cause or reason to this, might ever be understood by me alone. March 4, 2010. 3/4/2010 too. So long as the ideas appear within the mind, a possession that forms the escape into intellectual apprehension, powerful wisdom and profound understanding that strikes the root and ground principle of all ethical, hyperborean, and transmorbid reason, endless dreams and ambitions. It is not even possible? Instantaneous weeping and silver spells, severe as such, an immediate submersion of fire and archetypal will into none other than humanist scheme, seeming impossible to nullify in order to positively object. established not so much within a trap, yet so much within a system of irrationality coming toward inevitable doom, punished degeneration and tragical renunciation by cause of such transformation of enlightened and intelligible character, yet into darkest realms of forgotten sorcery and transmuted substances. Yet such a thing that encompasses every singular detail and ultimate device within the very universe, something that rightly so possesses the complete representation of the intellect. The process of nullification into dust and an inevitable obliteration of the course, however temporal, tragically so never within the infinite, in the running scaffold of chronological character. Yet more will come, however unacknowledged or unknown in the end it will be, even if ever it were to become something positively affirmed. Last words toward inevitable reflection, intensification and squalor's denial of such empty and debased human conduct, dismissed in irrational dogma and ultimate international scheme. We are once and forever the fool, in itself complete. Would this reality and its existence through the will be nothing more than a mere symbolic reflection of the inner being represented everywhere deep inside the very mercurial substance? Could such essential manifestation even appear through the means of biomechanical computation machinery, embedded deep within the bodily torso, a technological cord of some kind, one that appears simulated, organized, and rationalized by an astronomical gadgetry, forbidden mystery, and even exoteric studious ritual secrecy? Before infinite courses, we are forever reborn and renewed, yet only renewed, at least forever. March 4, 2010. 3/6/2010. Into infinity of subjective negation in a nihilistical anemia of the beta horde, intense mortification of the body and anatomical denial of monumental form, potential departure of the rabbinical curse, setting and establishment of the principled individuation, chosen conception within millions of vast yet similar variations, creation of purposive force, archetypal reason for pure intention to creation of clarity, the better ground to behold the suppositional threshold of reality and phenomenal spirit, existence of the state, thrown into magnanimous destruction, and for the drunken purpose of excuse and self-induced incapability, probably upon birthright, before sentimental suffering of particular flesh, within pure yet diametrical visions, symbolism of the decaying mind, empirical return toward the anatomical composition, necessity of lunacy and the total circumnavigation of impended diphtheram, becoming of clarity, yet more impossible and difficult to perceive simultaneously. Where was the word chosen within such total yet immediate certainty of sensitive spirit, to be gone from the abysmal storm and suicidal apocalypse, found within infinite yet fallen scheme of pluralistical multitude? Alpha was forever only the Omega. March 6, 2010. 3/12/2010. I'm becoming more sensitive to the particular notion that, within the matter of writing or stating something in any way possible, it is coming to be proven near impossible to direct in such order without beholding the apprehension of such tearful morality and bleeding sentimentality, that every notion and everything manifest and summoned within and around, created and conceived as none other than from the source and root principle in possession and belonging to the degree and rank of such will, the statement of purpose, the clarity and possibility of such a spiritual ideal, denied by hardly justifiable yet almost criminal objectification, stemming from throughout the vast plenitude of this foremost willingness and sentimental suffering, incapacitated, groundless, and unable to remove from the bestiality that suffers and breathes deep inside the solar plexus. Tyrannical terror, likewise, among the endless form and structure of subjective agitation belonging to the beast. In addition to this, it is beheld the skeptical cluelessness and dumbfoundedness of an entire millennium of inimical thoughts, dubious morality, and pure stupidity in the particular case of the Germanic horde, among such founded and constructed habitats and threshold of damned and darkest reality, already from the beginning poisoned and cursed upon by some wicked potential and tendency of a few initiates, long lost behind and impossible to project towards such a thing in any footing or powerful threshold for the purpose or fairness of all existential willing. March 12, 2010. 3/15/2010. Perhaps there is a rational purpose for this insanity. However, where is the cause? What is its source from? Looking into everything so deeply, so transfixably, as though I did not get enough of what I so desperately long to perceive, I have not yet experienced the weird nature of reality so deeply in such a matter. Where is the chronological series coming from? What is the reason behind the symbolism? It is more than ever now, Lord, Creator, whatever it may be that is within, deep inside the psychological brain. Somewhere it has its source. Why is it that I must fall so far within the oblivion it has constructed for me, the impossible chaos that to understand is concocted so artfully and schematically? Twisted, dangerous, harmful, and tormenting, it is for a reason that the seemingly most punishable fate and lamentable destiny must take its place in pure form in nuclear substance that is of the very will. Tragical in becoming, worsening and wasting, it can only be down from the epitomal summit and broad zenith apex from here. For whatever so happened that the initiation of this intellect into the world came about preconceived, unreadied, and preliminarily speaking, before the unleashing of the spirit from the nurturing womb in time into the coarse and forever unnatural habitat in space. We are forever all destined to speak of this, however masked and altered the representation behind such subjectivity might so appear. The imagination of an idea, however so slightly the will alters itself in dialectical construct and reformative communication with such an idea, and it is all the symbolism being concealed in form and matter of a very flesh-sensitive and concrete world, feeling trapped and tricked frequently as though there were some external empire without the support and upholding of the very will. Everything in its observation, everything in its eyes, whatever I will, it is here before me, becoming constructed, altered, formed, and changed in accordance with some sensitivity, subjectivity, and reality. I feel succumbed many times to the various tricks and schemes of the world that I came involuntarily to represent before the mind and spirit, tricks and schemes that intend nothing more than to cry away, bleed upon, and submerge the body into a sea of water or blood, drowning the self before anything upright, strongly intelligible, and helpfully constructive could be done about and made into order outside of such unintelligible and ultimately inferior, willingly evil schemata. There appears various forms of the game that the Lord or Creator or I myself have inadvertently concocted and devised for the self to participate within. It is very tiresome, and escaping from such slavery becomes seemingly futile to do so over time, and I find myself waking here before it and wallowing in such strangely unreal yet watery demise. Terror in according approach to the process is frequently experienced after long-term knowledge of such helpless conditioning. I don't intend to stray away, lose the self from the goals and aims that in the end it ultimately necessarily intended to achieve, succeed and triumph in order to inherit the right reward and reasonable success that for such a length of time inevitably bound and determined me to reap. I don't ever think I am so alone as deserving of the coming defeat and powerful failure that in my reality I appear to rather have been heading toward, and such a thing I cannot affirm for it ever to happen. March 15, 2010. 3/20/2010. Everything within space and time appears to have been thrown into obliterative spasming, a kind of cursedness, crushedness, something so inevitably that it seems cannot be evaded from or denied, at least not without a brutal and totalistical effort. There it appears the universal scheme, game of sort, prefabricated terror, agitation, and drownedness that comes about only from a few or multiple cases of negligence, erroneous mishandling, and fortuitous and insane disrepresentativeness, that only in one case alone has it come into such being as at an absolute and fully responsible burdensome measure of terror, choice and fate, and logical directed destiny. The solitary nature of every few particular men throughout the universal summoning world, cursed and damned into inferno for the sake of the just fate, through reflecting upon and looking into the past historical progression, and thus afterward the rightly so rewarded benefits, or rather the consequences and punishment, for the forsaken and so named character. Everything trick-laden, submersion of the positive intellect into further haze of watery confusion, unable to clarify anything, resist or to correctively absolve the astonishable delusions, schemes, and confusing blunders throughout the course of man's lifetime sentence. It appears where every so named blessed and realizing subject appears and manifests among the absolute knower, there it appears a further curse and rational sentence in reminder and close observation of the envious nature and state of that noble, intelligent, and wise man. Hell and perdition must inevitably take him further into the inevitable abyss and justified inferno through a series of past action, sin, and seemingly irrelevant derogatory behavior. Tragedy and dramatic art, among the truest and most noble intellect and artistic representations, where in the case of the blessed soul or spirit would appear favorable, intriguing, and preferred, it is in the rather opposite case of accursed and damned soul and spirit, however laboriously noble and intelligent his mind may be, that such a case would appear unfavorable, dislikable, and thoroughly repulsive among the reactionary, sentimental, yet blessed subject within his time and space. We are all of one, and the one thing in itself represents the all. Therefore, it can even seem that all willing, striving for, in sentimental suffering, to represent the self in an ultimately real and honest state, that it would necessarily be a kind of vanity and downright futility, for the thing would be only talking and communicating to itself and by itself, however difficult it is for the artist in order to recognize this. It appears that everything may become so difficult for an agitative sufferer of reality that any hope to redemption and apology can or will be futile within the given length and span of his lifetime, that even after his spirit and soul is entirely finished in its statement and where it is forgotten and done, there appears a spiritual continuum and manifest cycle within his given frame of character and state of mind, that all of the willing recurs in various radical different scenarios and within an infinite series of time, however difficult it may be in order to break from the very tradition. It is of an unknown and totally unreal or unobservable question to put any conviction into or any truth, and rather that such a thing should forever in its given state of time remain a matter of hope, trust, and faith. Yet, whatever the subject feels and puts any interest into, there should always appear an oppositional and arbitrary reaction in its effect from such feeling, thought, and spirituality. For the prime reason of the knower's suffering is in itself in order to suffer for the sake of itself, within the particularly chosen and referred to state of mind and frame of character. We are the supporters and upholders of our very truthful and rightly brutalistical damnation and reality, for it is more of a question of atonement for our actions and for our wickedness, rather than the delusional allures of various random subjects that appear for themselves only to be going through some psychological state of insane optimism, health, and innocence, when in reality nothing in its central essence could possibly permit that, in any form or kind of scientific or purely sane reason. It is to become a very troublesome and highly difficult opportunity and scenario to live with and in effect pull itself without from and all the way completely. Will such a thing even be possible to accomplish, achieve, and triumph from within the total assessment of the willing subject's knowing recognition and striving toward a more positive understanding of the world around everything? March 20, 2010. 3/23/2010. Frozen in severe states of fear. Do not close the eye, for the nightmare begins to believe in its death. Inside deepest philosophical states of permutation and frostbittedness, denial of submission to it, however complicated such a thing will be. Further insight into the closeness and relativity of the very beast, closest steps before the very intellect, satanical formation in the very birds coming from and departing from the wretched pile of human waste, bedridden for the sake of absolute futility in everything and for it finally becoming understood, nowhere near the hand and spirit of human restoration, probably for becoming dislikable from the very so-called Creator or Lord himself, transmutation of such representation to bestial and agitative form, multiplication of terrorization and agonizing nightmare, deepest cries behind transmission and broadcasting from all or any innocent spirit to the very penultimate mega-structure of the cursed and diseased satanical criminal, the world and the universe hardly more titanic than the shape of the flesh and the span of the eyes, classical punishment for reasons unbeknownst to this particular subject in understood time, however noble and humanistically understood to the absolute knower upon the end of the particular phenomenal sentence. Every appearance, thing, and form belonging to and redirected to the knower, one that more than likely had begun to reject, negate, hate, and vilify and deny the very subjective creation. Astonishment for the twist occurred in momentary sequence and in segue. Mercy in its rejection. A saddest, most lamentable fate of would-be yet unrealizable knower in knowledge. Please, for the sake of introductory justice, bring it to the end. March 23, 2010. 4/8/2010. April 8, 2010. Note. Here are 3 purely historical writings in their inclusion being added here to this day. It appears that doing such a thing for myself was for the longest time being desired, and that doing so seems to have been inevitably coming toward necessity. As time went by, without regard to how foreign, strange, out of state, and mistaken this setting may have been, I feel objective and reasonable well enough by now not to take interest in any of the animosity that was currently evident within these older and progenitive writings, and I am truly eager to dismiss the controversial surrounding, for now such ideas at the time have become so radically transformed, changed, and cognitively fixed. Yet, regardless of it, all remains notable for me as part of a cohesive whole in all and every state of the mind. September 2006 note. This writing was entitled On the Philosophy of My Music, but is old and outdated. The point of preserving this writing is that shortly after I wrote it, I began severely doubting all post-pagan culture and civilization in general. It began a progressive transition from my old mentality that believed in these things to basically the birth of a new mentality of honor beyond prejudice and even beyond the usual modern conception of pagan. On the philosophy of my music. The old and archaic days of music in Europa, not being specific about any era, but referring to the old art music, have become outdated and become more so with every passing day. If all of northern European dominated territory consisted of medieval flutes and lutes, and we were content with that, I might explode into chunks. If we were content with just that, then it would portray the unraveling realization that class struggle would be nearly non-existent. I would love to see the peasants and serfs with their music not yelling about their hatred for the higher men or wanting to overthrow them for once, but to see them with tough minds, loving to rise early in the morning to work on the farm, though not knowing how to read or write, but they are content with that. They leave the intellectual work to the higher class, the ones that shape the concepts of the state, while the lower classes actually shape the state in full compliance and love for their masters, and most of all community itself. But as we notice throughout history, there will always be the noble elements not understanding 100% how to deal with the lower classes on every occasion, not to mention there will be elements of the lower classes not understanding 100% how to deal with the noble classes, but most importantly the former. When this happens, the mistake is that the nobleman has dealt with the peasant, serf, etc. at the level of the peasant, serf, etc., but that he had stated something negative about the lower class man, erasing the lower class man's vision of the noble as a great and mythical legend, as if he were a hero, and however easy it may be to incredibly uncommon mentalities. But there will always be even noble men that will slip in speech around the lower classes because of quarrels in general, family, allies, foreign states, religious struggle, which had come about as new offshoots of Christian theology were birthed in opposition to Roman Catholicism, because it was this religion that had grown increasingly senseless and unconvincing in regards to its practices, indulgences, etc., that accumulates over a while if they do not disappear and relieve the noble man. The result in this specific case was the unnecessary insult of the peasant. It seems as time goes by, the number of these kind of instances increase. Not to mention during the last few decades of the ancient regime, it seemed nearly all of the aristocrats had no reason to be so anymore. It was because the aristocrats had only remained so by birthright. Even this would produce automatic wealth without any good reason. The new aristocrats had not become so by way of heroic victories for their land. It wouldn't even be permitted by law to fight in the front lines of battle anymore. All the peasants would now see in these days with aristocrats large estates, expensive clothing, elegant parties, etc. By now the lower classes had enough, which I see as completely reasonable. But unfortunately, in the stage of uprooting institutions, this is when all hell breaks loose, as the oppressed will never fight to bring back their old days, but instead take advantage of the new line of thought to create a state that will spoil themselves to no end. Not to mention that by now there was a whole new struggle rising from the depths, which was born from nearly the same causes as the actual class struggle itself. Just replace the aristocratic and noble classes with that of men in general, and the peasant and serf, etc. classes with that of women in general, when reading the second paragraph of this writing. It must also be noted that several decades preceding the French Revolution, that Enlightenment thoughts had been existing as a counter-reaction to the earlier ages, which Enlightenment thinkers had come to view as tyrannical and absolutist. The founders of this era were the intellectual elite, which is odd. Perhaps even they had felt offended to the newer ideas that reinforced the old divine right of kings. I'm really beginning to think that the struggle today wouldn't be so extreme, but would be as extreme had not Louis XIV existed. Also, if he had not existed, it would be much more likely that Louis XVI would not have been guillotined. The lower classes would not have had embedded in their subconscious the image of the previous kings as tyrannical and senseless, as well as the idea that there might not even have been a French Revolution to begin with. But I wonder if Louis XIV would have been so absolutist had not he been reigning during a time of religious struggle between the Roman Catholics and Protestants. This struggle which was the prototype to the realization of the class struggle. Anyhow, you will notice at the time of this revolution that music had begun to change around relatively the same time, pioneered by Beethoven. It is strange. You notice his third symphony, Eroica, had originally been composed in honor of Napoleon Bonaparte and named after him. He later changed the name of the symphony once Napoleon declared himself emperor. Not to mention that reading the libretto to the Ninth Symphony's final movement is always interesting, but that does not matter. It is evident in Beethoven's music that, outside of his personal quarrels with his relative, his struggle with hearing loss, etc., is the fact that he was also quite interested about the changing times in regards to humanity, etc., and the music became more exaggerated in all aspects. Afterward, maybe only a few well-known composers were born in the first decade of the 19th century, the most notable one being Hector Berlioz, whose music was mostly born out of sexual romanticism, coupled with a longing for the distant past. However, there would be many born in the second decade, 1810s. By 1848, which around that time, there were all sorts of revolutions. If you listen to or study Liszt's music, it could not be any more exaggerated and passionate. One must note the overall dichotomy to his mind throughout his life, that of the Catholic and Mephistophelian passions, the latter mostly birthed from Paganini's music, and especially the performance Liszt witnessed of him in his early years. But not to forget, in regards to his music, his love for Princess Caroline of Sayn-Wittgenstein at the time, which he had found out that marriage with her was not possible. There was also Wagner, whose music was composed purposely to convey a drama, and the music itself consisted of all the art forms. It does not matter, though, for after the Second World War, which might have well been the ultimate and final struggle between two sides, where one attempted to transform the old world into the new, and the other side vice versa. It was the former that won, with America as its decisive victor, which at this time had grown to become a literal metamorphosis of the Union from Civil War times, to spread the Union's ideas and morals throughout all the continental America. And in America during the time of the Vietnam War, by then race struggle was entirely evident. Again, read paragraph 2 for how this came about, replacing the high classes with whites and the low classes with coloreds. The religious parentheses do not apply. The flower power pacifism was birthed and formulated into the counterculture phenomenon. Read the Black Death Manifesto concerning the counterculture and the growing reaction to it, especially in regards to music. The point of this writing, in its purest sense, is to tell you how my music came to be and what it is today, as well as to outline how time progressed from the old class-based nations to that of today's humanism and its effect on music, in this case my music. Odin. Sometime in July 2006. September 9, 2006. Note. I soon declared myself mentally dead within the same month, declaring this phrase because of an overwhelming stress that resulted when I realized and found credibility in Schopenhauer's essays that were basically saying, existence is futile, man exists to die, life is a contradiction. This last sentence, where life means the history of Christianity and the Europeans. I'm assuming Schopenhauer came to conclusions, at least regarding history up to his point in the timeline, that I was soon falling to, concluding. The Black Death Manifesto. There are certain genres of music, in this case certain genres of metal, that are not meant for the stupid mass of nobodies. It seems that since the turn of the 21st century, that the bands of these genres consist of only these idiots, and the audience might be even stupider. The two major genres meant to sum up the reaction of thinkers to the counterculture happy, world-embracing weaklings are the black and death genres. These two started off quite well in the early to middle 80s as a takeoff and development of the thrash and speed genres that had been existing during the time. There was also grindcore, but this was generally caught in the trap of the counterculture philosophy as well, at least to a mild extent. No, first thing, death metal should never be technical in a melodic sense, i.e. the purpose of this style defeats the intentions of the original conception of the genre. This style, from the start, agrees to prioritize the technicality first, not as a musical sense, but so that this kind of band may attract listeners, because the band thinks, hey, people will think we are talented, they will like us because of this, and we will make money. A good death metal band will never make talent and technicality most important. They are truly talented, but this genre scraps all intent of showing off to people, like some virtuoso Yngwie Malmsteen takeoff. A good death band will deliberately make use of an atmosphere that conveys death. The ideal sound should be as intense as Wagner was to German romantic opera. If the band is heard by an uninitiated listener and scares him, or at least confuses him, what is that? Could that be real? Or even gets him to laugh, well, this latter reaction might be undesirable. The listener might as well be one of you, only just naive and undeveloped in the world of extreme death metal. Then it is relevant and true to the subconscious motivation of the genre's origins. Nowadays, you'll hear bands that the idiots of the world will laugh at and mock, rather than be frightened of. That is because the motivation behind these bands have never compromised its normalcy in plain atheism, lack of sadomasochism, or incredible differences in the universe that they exist in, for instead settling for motivation of these bands that include the opposite of these things, if not even more. That Then there's the black genre, which has been dead since the end of the 20th century, not because of the founders of the genre, but because here too the genre has been swamped by a mess of popularity-seeking, non-evil humanists, those of which might as well belong to or be a new generation of secularists, which have Christian morality faintly embedded in their subconscious. The origins of this genre was created and evolved as the ultimate reaction to the modern world. There's no other music out there so fiercely pessimistic and oppositional to it. In fact, some of the bands, especially Darkthrone, may have taken this genre to its ultimate level in aesthetics and design, musical sound, etc., so that it is impossible to be even more reactionary. Not to mention bands like Abruptum. It would stab and slice itself during the recording sessions of their albums, creating truly authentic screams of torment and agony. The black metal sound, again, has nothing to do with virtuoso technicality, and in this case, there is a kind of vocal technique that is incredibly important, not to be confused with the new metal or hardcore screams, which is often the case. Dark Funeral's Atera Totus Sanctus. Even these days, the genre has become so corrupt that the appearance of them will generate laughter from outsiders. They might as well be professional wrestlers or promotional propaganda for the mainstream media, which wants them to look a certain way. Dimmu Borgir's Galder is the epitome of this. No, firstly, the black metal sound must generate a level of intensity unheard of, excluding the true death genre, but it is different from this. In fact, the less bass present, the more optimal, true lifelessness, where it must convey an atmosphere of obsoleteness, futility, non-existence. The music seems to be here, then gone, pain and emptiness, as if there is no longer a point in life. People have achieved the state that Christianity had promised 2,000 years ago, and your people, the naturally gifted and intelligent, have been fighting and reacting to since. Well, this was written to speak for those who feel the same way I do in regards to the extreme metal situation in Europa, but especially America, which will always be inferior to Europa, even if Europa extreme metal is pathetic. No trendsetter will listen, the usual. No humanist will agree, most predictable. No, thoughts like these are only directed to the few, but unfortunately all the idiot, weak spirits are able to read these things, and of course become offended. It does not matter. That is another point to this mentality. If we offend their values and morals, we could care less. We're not happy and cheerful like them to begin with. In fact, their reactions make us even more oblivious to them, because we are tormented by their arguments day by day, and eventually result in cutting them off and dictating for hours on end, so that we are able to escape for hours from postmodern individualism and freedom, and not hear the weak humanism. You must note, if you pause to take a breath, allowing a suggestion from the opposite spectrum, you lose. When this suggestion has been placed, it becomes quite difficult from this point on in getting them to shut up and think, for they did not hear you through entirely. There are still misconceptions they have of you, therefore they remain unconvinced. They will now never quit arguing. The only way to stop them is by frightening them, a fierce and heartless anger in the tone of your voice, threatening their lives, etc., which then they might shut up for just a second. But if you are smart and have your words planned out during this moment, and convey them artistically, you may succeed in the process of dictating to them as you had been previously. But remember, no pausing or breathing, as the cycle will start over again and cause great agony and hopelessness. Written Kirke, July 26. September 9, 26 note. This was written before On the Philosophy of My Music was written. I reasoned that I wrote On the Philosophy of My Music as a last attempt to clarify radical thinking concerning the thoughts that culture is so great. Unfortunately, Romanticism soon lost its appeal after it was written, and even the Baroque became looked at negatively. The disinterestedness in Baroque took some time. However, everything, all aspects of civilization, a continuation of struggling, religious struggle being the most prominent. How would history have been shaped without the Christ, or the New Testament, or even the Old? What would history have been like if the Holy Roman Empire had never existed, or if the pagan Northerners hadn't been defeated, but instead conquered even the whole of Europa? This modern utopia, I've officially found the reason to existence, is here for alienation, uselessness, emptiness, which after long amounts of time with these experiences will strengthen us to the point of absolute mysticism. Our bodies seem to be here, visible to others. We are walking to the market, driving around, doing errands, but our minds have long since exited this universe. Sometimes we don't respond at all to others, even if they are screaming for our attention. Perhaps we have lost our five senses, at least when forced to be around incredibly uncomfortable environments and settings, places that should never have been conceived, crowded, polluted metropolises, bitter racist slums, endless traffic noise, counterculture demonstrations, etc. I no longer care what others have to say or criticize for me. For a while I had been easily upset by this criticism, but some time later I became oblivious of it. I had heard, read, and thought enough about my turmoil and its futility. I am beyond convinced. Everything outside makes me shudder, and I now knew that others would only agree if tied up and threatened decapitation, which would be futile as well. There would have to be millions of incidences of this, and when achieved and they are released, most likely 100% of them will go back to the idiot thinking habits in either anti-old world or pro-foreigner racism. I'm truly thinking about giving this wretched existence up in favor of absolute detachedness from it, going back to a time where the original Americans had lived this lifestyle, one without a numbing social order, where the best are lawless, wandering through untouched conifers and snow. Odin, sometime in June 2006. April 8, 2010. 4/16/2010. So tragic. To die and become reborn in a new positive life form, seemingly far away in an unreachable distance. Sometimes it is for the better, yet it is going to be difficult to know right now, alone. A very profound and deep transitional figuring. April 16, 2010. 5/20/2010. Sunken deeper into sands of incapability, wretchedness, and deceased disfigurement, what light remains within the tunnels of bittermost abortion, depression, sorrow, tears, and vitriol munificence? Feeling so painfully sad, bedridden, in utter turmoil, such tears, a foremost state, encapsulated, fallen, and succumbed in totalistical lies and deception of sickliest forms of the human race. We will not stop this. We will not triumph from reality in such despair and abhorrence that summarizes and catapults the very human spirit into buried infernal waste, funereal doom, and watery disfigurement. Drowned, suffered, afflicted from remorse, in ultimate suicidal resolution. We will not return, escape, and conceal the burning animosity from the other side. However late and foremost within the evening will it so haphazardly and accidentally appear, in consequence before the very eye. Same within the currents. We are in a dream state of remorseful feeling for the suffering effect in decadent currency and deficient relevancy. No more will have of it. The possession that took the harrowing form of minute course, entreat and extol apart from the subjective currency needed to behold it throughout the ennobled end. Primary diffusion of collateral course and deposition toward damage and harm, toward a minute radical grubbingness, leeches upon matter in terrible human form, before vast removal and severe riddance of needless human waste. I am alive within you. To the mother of my soul, said from the presupposed father, tragical determination and horrendous plethora of schematical conformity, ever so difficult in order to break from such distinguished patterns of intelligible thoughts. We are within the lonelier forms and minute manna of visceral perturbation. I will not believe. You will not convince. Revelations toward obscured sentiment needing not any justification other than paradoxical stupidity arrested within the eye of the most unfortunate abyss. Dialectical movement toward performance entails ravishingly dark and fundamentally impossible lunacy upon the head of the state. Inside the lost riddles of perplexive confusion, final utmost performance of deceased and decadent estate toward unknown proletarian subjection. Abyss inside the pretentious insanity of Third World War storms, mystical submission of unknowable representation. We will never regain and recover from the absolute collapse and diametrical funerality, fallen into irrelative and impossible inferno. So it is, the one, the state, the world of all and of its nothingness. May 2010. 5/26/2010. Implicit extraction into lost Sumerian mazes of vast confusion. By twice, by twice! Brilliant master, behold thy cacophony, entrance of thy summoner into mortifying depths of blackest melancholical hell. Stand before thee, relative sun. O sun, cast thy spell, heat of the sky. Burn thy herb field and harvest thy positive energy force throughout this land of Atlantis and the oceanic wastes. Little devil, speak of its name. Stand before thy brethren. See, my child, we come before thee. We are the oceanic wastes. We are the masters throughout this land of Atlantis, the elective sword and shield carriers. Watch over the magic and the craft of Thoth. Inferior grey matter, now open thy mouth. In between interior legging is thy mistress Nephthys. We come to thee. Behold, the one among us stands tall. Stand tall, clasp thy sword and clasp thy shield. State the owner's name before we, O beauteous sun, among thy formation. Shalt we not surrender upon thy various incantations of the owner's name? We are before thee. We are below thee. Science the calling upon immortals. The names of cherubim and blackest malice for the upright creation is sought from thy onerous name. Stand tall, quiet the force around thee. Quiet the force around thee. Thou art adept in sacred knowledge and wise character. None shalt will thy name without thy honour's regard, with any ill contempt. To say, shine brilliantly, shine brilliantly. The cusp of thy moon is at hand, one whose fate rests before the common hour, in moment of Elder's tenebrum. Into the shadows of time, thou shalt not face the darkest wrath and fury without holding firm thy scourge of justice and harmonious reflection. Spell and libation. We shall stand back. We watch as the character descends. How pitiable he is. The suffering affliction ruins thy fate. Now, fall into the hand of immortal doom. Funeral pyre, stand upright as it is thy date, to come upon thee and create thyself before thy encroaching mass of predator and predator, beast and beast. Impossible possibility, denial of thy destiny among erroneous misapprehension. See as it is thy state. Upon upper walls, hold before the eye. Thou shalt not let thy slippage affect thee with any municipal waste. Dost thou not makest sense unto thou? Yea, who shalt reap the three keys of chaos, of order and harmony, wilt not commend thy uppermost lodging before thee in the house of spirited bodies? Yet enough of this speech. See it is the eye of horse. It is the eye of horse. Rise upright, commence thy feast. Awake thy rest. Now parched with thirst, alone and dying, there is the revered water of grace flowing throughout the beauteous name. He who weaves the spell of blackened curse, before thy name, Osiris horse. Now upright, as it is we who speak, to say, stand before the altar, among the head of Atum, before the mouth of Ma'at, to annihilation of the wicked. Nil verum nisi mors. May 26, 2010. 6/2/2010. Lately I've received some good amount of money. In fact, I was thinking about taking a trip. I'll probably take a trip by next month when I receive even more money. I'm thinking about taking a trip to Japan, a 2-week trip. I think by next month that such a thing should be affordable. Doing it should be exciting for me. I think there is coming a necessity in time that I need to eventually do this. And everything is symbolically pretty much calling upon me. I've been looking into this. It seems there's needed a lot of planning to be done in order to pull off this trip successfully. I think such a thing should be done by now in my life. I don't see an opportunity like this really coming up anytime soon. If I were to move out, I will be given only just enough for the necessities every month. I don't see myself anytime soon having this kind of money again. So I'm going to check up on everything and make sure this is going to work. Hirner has gone to Japan once or twice. I think he will help me out. I'll see about this. It is not determined yet. I have some good news. If I were to wait another month after I talked to Hirner about doing this, getting his help preparing for this trip, that I could very well experience the dream of visiting another very interesting country for me for 2 weeks. I think that it should be an okay thing for me. I know it isn't the wisest way of doing something, yet I do know that there will not likely be another opportunity like this coming up for me in the meantime or anytime soon. I've been so intrigued about Japan for a very long time. Many things that I'm interested in have its source from that country. I think it would be better for me to experience something like this, to get outdoors and travel somewhere for the time being. It's a place that I've been really interested in for a long time. I think it might be confusing figuring out the means of transportation around town. The airplane tickets and hotel prices for 2 weeks should be affordable by next month for me, though. I think with enough preparation, everything should work out well enough. I do know that this is a big idea to take into consideration. I'm going to talk to Hirner about this. I went down to Barnes & Noble and purchased, with my birthday gift card, a map of Tokyo and a travel guide book with all sorts of information on when to go during the year, hotel prices, things to do, itineraries, and also to cut expenses. I'm going to make the trip for 1 week now instead of 2. This way it'll be more affordable. Anyway, I've been reading the book and trying to find some things to do while there. I have planned in mind a hotel somewhere in central Tokyo, where Akihabara is, and Shibuya. Basically, the places with all the neon lights and the crazy businesses and people scampering about. And yes, I think the idea to this represents a stark contrast need for balancing the extremities of my depressed and pessimistic outlook on nearly everything in this world. So doing this naturally has come to my respect. It appears that Japan, and more specifically Tokyo, represent a good balance in the spectrum of my very will, whereas this place is not so extremely foreign, strange, and obscure for my own interests. I just would like to find some things to do out there. The book I got lists some great activities. It tells me there I could visit an imperial palace, there are Shinto shrines, there's the Tokyo Tower, business and shopping districts with festivals, scenic gardens and stuff. I'm thinking about experiencing some of this. The food there I'm not too big on, mostly because it being centered on fish, which I've been allergic to throughout my life. But the ramen noodles should come in handy for sure. That is a pretty cheap commodity regardless. I don't plan on buying much of anything while I'm there. I do plan on bringing the camera with me, taking some videos and photos. For now, a tricky part is to find the right hotel. The most tricky thing is to navigate around throughout the city without becoming lost. Every sign and letter while over there is foreign and obscure, nearly impossible for me to relate without any training. I'm not sure yet what to do, but I do plan to make use of the Japanese railway system, which I have read is affordable and expansive. I do think the culture there in this city could be pretty shallow, but something about it, for me at least, appears to be so dreamy, otherworldly, strange, and familiar. As though my next life will take place there somewhere. I've been imagining about the atmosphere of the place a lot. I've been reading into it and watching videos. It all seems so strange and spectacular to me, to visit and experience it all at least once. June 2, 2010. 6/3/2010. Feelings, emotions, thoughts. Recovered deep inside a chasm of ultimately strived for expression. Glances at glimmering serenades where all positive objection becomes provocative, haphazard, instigative, however sinister and useless it would be to continue in commencement. Inside the world of willing, striving for, meager attempts towards unity and cooperation of one subjective creation with many objectified expressions of its own reflection, as if a towering pessimistic winter amid many shallow and eager to dismiss mistakes shall bear itself a name, as though an emptiness within many various objections pervades seriously within a mind, yet probably for no other reason than to insist fluidly to bring to the core eventually a complete catalogue and lexiconic celebration of terribly contused, infraction, damaged and abused confusion and inherited distraction. It speaks together, however abuses both the dually united and reciprocatively forced transformation, intending the achievement toward a state and condition of communication that shall lastingly enervate and release the clutch from the trapped state of dubious yet monistically configured ideality, transfixed and ascended in wedlock, apart from the head damaged structure to the core, away from the most seriously sinister standard of essential substance. Do not fear, heard deep within the abysmal chasm, for it knows only an ambiguous, absolute subjective knowledge that subsists within the hand of procreation, formativeness, and archetypal mastery. In a deep blue subsurface fixation of cerebral construction, founded and infused with seemingly chaotic oceans and vast chemical toxicity of watery substance, that if pervaded through a course of great time underneath unknowingly and harmfully lasting effect, would appear to the significant position the necessary and inevitable degree and sentence to the harming, ultimately damageable poison, drunken stupidity, and cancerous wielding of a plague. No further succession within the course of determinable destiny might it ever shine so brilliantly and so brightly as it had once done and subsisted, for within the approximate position of the ultimate sands of time, an ultra-divisional historical approximation came before it. We plant the sword in the soil, without addition or summary. We reason before it believe, while upon troubled countenance. Shall we not tremble the gigantic abyss that splits otherwise the very vexative ground any longer, and it shall not affect ever so deeply the woundedness that once ought never to have been born, conceived, and appeared within the reminiscent memory of subjective conflict. Stately green fluxative harmony, with throughout victorious affects of fertilized flowering. The entrance deepens, form thyself within. It is upon summer greeting, mutual conjunction, and cosmopolitan harmony. Shall it not end thus in despair, neither in dismay? It is as it is, together the state of ever so masterful and so highly its ethical doctrine, the canonical masterpiece. For it is we that speak upon so great, riddled, and tumultuous amazement, a blistering confusion of incommunicable speed, fluxative mysteries. However prophetic and zealous the human melody speaks and dictates among the many orations and harmonious resonances, throughout philosophical reverence and rationally scientific rhetoric, we are likewise on rush toward a procreative grace and a performative beauty. in the vast scheme of human conditions, while out there upon the understanding of purposive intention, of harming another out of fear, jealousy, and complexitive ambiguity, by the precedence and license of towering masterly imperators, one or two of the archetypal subjective creations might remain well within this historical period of human conduct. There exists the need for a profound struggle, the seed of turmoil to be birthed and reared in introduced conception toward the brilliant excellence that feeds off in the necessity toward providing underneath it ground-footed thresholds throughout the manifold scaffolds of hatred and confused abysmal mastery. However, while within the ultimate conclusion rightful indoctrination of fundamental elements and essential mysteries shall it commence to restore under the suffering brow of the kingly head, thou shalt not cease, neither desist from thyself. The graduation, inculcation, and assimilation of creative force into the reflections of an absolute subjective knowers of creation, striving for an artistic representation of a worldly idea, an ideality and a vision toward profound submersion, confusion and permission within the subsurfacing doors and vexative magical scaffolds of darkest remembrance and nostalgic memory, throughout the currencies from solar construction, the everlasting harmony of ocular deity and godlike divinity, and on towards the sands of time. June 3, 2010. Six 7/2010. I feel at times the need to speak about something, almost anything, in relation to how I've been. When I began to establish myself any of the knowledge I might wish upon to express accurately, it becomes a rather fluid mess, full of inconsistencies, doubt, dubiousness, preponderous mystery. In essence, the thing that resembles quite closely the opening of an abyss deep inside the consciousness of my derelict and poisonous mind. Inside the ideas appear rather distorted, twisted, shunned, perplexive. The things around me, objects and such gateways to representation, appear onto me upon the I am in accordance with relevancy to the conditioning of the subject, which has come to be understood by me as I myself. If only nature and existence were not so erroneous and specially conceited. It appears at times again to me that the life and the representations I summonly manifest speak upon themselves in direct accordance to my will, and when asking the question as to how such a thing has come about, the resolution will appear rather baffling, unknowable, and complicated to understand more fully, if it is at all possible to do such a thing. I, as I am right now and here, have come about and become conceived through vast, long, and infinite chains of effects, springing from the spirit before the source and substance, founding and establishing the character in its intelligence right along its way, completely rendering any of the causes impossible, troublesome, and incredibly enveloped from the essence of the general mystery. What more is needed to be known when all and what I am is everything and anything willed upon and conjured constantly, made manifest before dark and obscured eyes, unable to comprehend the essential mystery behind everything, as everything in itself will run through itself and progress into a notorious state of flux, change, ruinous destruction, and probable recreation, the kind of knowledge as the representation of things, through the perceptions of the sense, and the comprehensive understanding of such things as they are right here in their very monumental form. Enormous metropolises, through direct comprehension, appear bustling with objectifications, representations, and knowledge of the will. It appears likewise where various spots, positions, and locations around the world where there is life, substance, and things do not or have not willed so accordingly, and therefore the general massiveness, density, and concentration of objective life around itself appears to be lesser summoned. Likewise, in various data, upon visual perception of letters, notations, signs, and various such propagations, there appears a vast contingent scheme that places several kinds of information in various degrees of comprehensibility, general visual easiness, defined grade of its realism, within whatever level and degree it is willed before the implicit subject. Such a thing will make its appearance throughout the various and infinite forms and ideas within a generally cohesive and familiar completion. Sensations bearing representations of color, shape, and geometric form, motion and arithmetic time, sounds, timbre, and taction, and such, all in representation capable of possible assimilation and direct comprehension into the knowing mind. Yet it is troubling to find it, to uncover and reveal the secret to all of it. Behind such a thing there is an ever-changing, everlasting nothingness, whereas the reason behind the skepticism brands itself a sign. However, it is knowable that where everything is apparent before the mind, ultimately unknowable and transformative, It is the various parts of life in general are known and established in the consciousness of the mind in a fleeting and successive form, state, and condition, that this knowledge in the mind renders the gateway to the infinite portal of time, and the absolute everything within it, become possible, extraordinary, and done, and almost so completely real. June 7, 2010. 6/12/2010. Deeper perception into the subjective unknown, a stationary lack of trust, wonder, and achievement, coming from above as means of a radically obtuse and fallen state of human condition. Difficult words to follow, going on and on in regard to knowledge of anything and everything, quietness and careful silence in the frontiers of a bleak horizon, last supper for those despised, impossible shortcomings and volatile reaction taken form in a whip, pessimistic disgust and ill regard to vast multiple cases of human bile and hemiplegia, looking forward to brilliance in an upright attempt to cure the various maladies of surrounding stupidity, sickly vehemence and utmost vengeful resentment, action, courage, vigor, and form, privileged one, ancient one among the weak, lingual structure, codification and vehicular procession into masterful perspective, distance and abandonment from useful things otherwise maligned, poisonous, and more cancerous, removal of the tumor by fleeting states of self-reformation, wallowing so deep within the horrible tunnels of self-cataclysm and malevolent downfall, waking upon sacerdotal schematism and a vast infested hive of sickly, drunken, poisonous blood of human pessimism, dark obsolescence and vengeful conformity, powerful completion of the self, expurgation of egoistic abysmal reclusions, benevolent, malevolent contradiction par excellence, proof of a once very healthy and open mind, narrowing for weakness of explicit response, further insight, shining star upon divine prodigal command, noble refinement and allegorical confirmation, affirmative composition while within deeply brooding intuitional faith, hope, and schemative crimes of philological charity for poor and stricken hearts, spirit, and manifest states, brighter demands, the great spirit of aeons charged forth in great vexative compassion, for the purpose of virtue, meaning, and truth. Without this very solitary mind, only death would be real. However alone it stands before the great nefarious chasm of self-annihilation, stupefaction, and verbose meaninglessness, spirit into putrefaction, waste and compost disassociation, birth, supplication, and generation twice into affirmative composition of a vast, endless, and unstoppable incarnation. The world, body, and spirit rooted in the Kabbalistic tree of life, never to return to the calming, stationary, oceanic, and mortifying state of the passive, meek castrate, and the ultimately very determined and negative effects upon the health and well-being of any and every good-natured spirit and upright human will. June 12, 2010. 6/19/2010. Final order and lost crown fallen into elemental storms of half-hearted hatred, impossible chaos, and derelict intolerance. Never remembered in the foundational setting, sentenced to commence reaffirmative transaction, formed in visual construction of minuscule molecular and totemic transformation. The great difficulty before the last absolution. Terrible estrangement, further amazement, and lost hell, deep inside foremost astonishment. The harsh transformation of frightened spells came to no more than barren, stark reality. The splintered staff, wadded throne, dirted amulet, dusted crown, missions bent excessively upon trouble and dissonant abortion, no noblesse, purity, or estate, a harsh wound summoned into darkest infernal tides, a chaotic shape-shiftness upon grandiose, obtuse triangulation of organical, medical, pathological eye lamentation, slowness of the moon ensconced in mortal fear and twilight blackest lunacy, etymological perception departed into once seemingly noble eyes and exceptionally sensitive organization, strange new transmutation of logical form in majestic deified ground and heroic attribute into multiple molecular eye recreation, death, mortality, malevolent decease, disfigurement among judgmental manifestation of darkest aeons, spasmic obliteration of positive force, not any more reason other than the essentialness of existence, extract from the fiery sulphuric truth, the meaningless afterbirth and warped alkaline condensation. Upon triumph of the great, defeat of the small, we behold the absolved, resolute, and radical support to our structure became manifest, freely given value to our very own existence, in particular, willing commandment, never destroyed, restoration of the solar health, heartiness, giftedness, honesty, and perplexive talent out of necessity to consecrate the integral motivations, masterful morality, and valuable ethical ambitions of the imperial king imperators. We are the ones willing brilliantly and powerfully within such otherwise dark, troubled, bleak, and mercurial disfigurement, diseasedness, and malevolent desistedness, to the primary summer of the feral zenith. June 19, 2010. 7/2/2010. I've been feeling more angry, more embittered, and radically troubled by some of the things that have taken up and encapsulated seemingly everything within my sensitive and noble realm of the universe. This terrible truth, something so difficult to bear inside its representation. Might it be the tone of voice, the method of deliverance of words and speech? All of it seems so unreal, when at the same time, for me, it appears there a totally unacceptable licensing of permission of these things, due to the varying assimilation and understanding of the data and information that has been becoming researched for so long throughout such a lengthy period of time. It's beyond evidence by now that the individual character and intelligence that has become bestowed upon its mind happens to be, not by accident or chance, but by a helpless determination of fate and godly act, gift, etc., that of, in regard to a system or code of morality or ethics, something belonging to a state of condition of being master and imperator among human flesh and spatial body. In attempt to assimilate in the stream the master's population, it is intended to know that such morality bears a distinct representation of its state and condition of its subjective knower, by bearing such a status, in order to project and afterward receive the rightful recognition desired upon, to find communion, mercy, and unity, to alleviate the trifold distress, pang of conscience brought about, naturally, by the prior resolve of oneself into a type and state of solitary and ultimately desperate reclusion. We by no means intend to do this, yet with such master morality and great over good code of ethics, the subject bearing its representation of this thing becomes inevitably and tragically met with, connected with, and associated with the type of morality, state of law, must I say ethical response issued before the so-named mentioned state in a type of an ambiguous, dubious, doubtful mannerism that ultimately commences the necessity and process of declaring the knower to repel apart from or to attempt the corrective rationalization of the matter through a rectifying and understanding further as the symbolical needs within its absolute, free, abolished, and objectively true form, from such skeptical cluelessness and dumbfounded ambiguity, from such things that are ultimately representations no more than irrationality, illogical emptiness, debasive and dismissive negativity, downright pessimism, and overall unhappiness, due to the inherent lack of perceived intelligence among the absolvable and resolute intellect of the upright performer and masterful rationalizer of this existence, in which case consequently it does come to be representative of me, of myself, of I am, among the mutinous struggling of multiplicable cohorts, in order to conform with everything in the necessary commencements, mutual respect and recommendation, distinguishedness of distant reverence and towering heartliness, good happiness and conscience, etc., free from indelible wounds, free from the rottenness of statuary decay and monumental form, undergoing lengthy moulders and watery-filled decomposition. As deliberate reasoning, the reality of such a situation becomes known, that where master morality breaks its ground, the intention of mutual nobility and mutual reverence, intelligence of mind and spirit, and so on, it is unfortunate for the fewness and irregular infrequency of such desired responses. It appears laughable, baffling, and troublesome, wearisome upon the conscience of the good soul, whereas seemingly forever the vast majority of humanity in the inhabited population makes its appeal to benevolent, sorrowful, and vexative sentiment for the profound insecurity and universal fear amidst the reconstruction and amalgamation of the master's statements, verdicts, bright plans, and brilliant desires for the world, that the becoming one with the master cannot be appealed to under these conditions, and the passionate massiveness from the Creator's very hands becomes troublesome and subsequently dismissed, due to the inherent dislikeness and underprivileged means of the moral slave amidst such grand capital and powerful achievements from intentional purpose, likewise from foremost resolute emergence from subjective and intelligible question. July 2, 2010. 7/3/2010. Explosion of brilliance. Philosophical, cultural, and phenomenal despair within intense settlement of profuse afterbirth. Extinguishment of the natural, inevitable ideas in potency. Behold the imperator, The unfortunate credence and reformation, amid towering, repulsing, and blistering signification of matriarchal decay and appealing sentiments, near impossible emancipation, for once masterful benediction to declare before the world, varying and intelligible, genuine, pure, and thoughtful representation of inherent knowledge and objective substantial truth, in the end of every formation. There it appears the will, suffering, loathsome, and incapable of all and any puritanical reform or upright decree, that it takes from the substance whatever it fears, through doubtful misunderstanding or miscomprehension of the primordial race, that it amends the discrete ideology in a twistedness, malformation, and distortion of the mannerisms to begin a successive exploitation and picky wickedness, to begin chipping away at the master enough to eventually ward his downfall, imprisonments and enslavements in the poisonous wielding hands and subjectively unstoppable laborers of a cancerous and malignant morality of the Judaical, craftily deconstructed and extorted reality of the human slave, the hidden motivations behind the realistic hammering and picking away at the marble, diamond-encrusted statues of positive, intelligent, noble, and aristocratically meaningful demeanors of the state. Eventually, the procession will fall to the beautiful form, becoming harmed, malicious, mutilated, and decayed beyond all expended measure, and inevitably becomes the determined fate and logical destiny of a fainted, failed, humiliated, wrecked, and diseased old man, hammered, shackled, and imprisoned by the helpless and ultimately petty forces of the weak and inferior moralists. The venomous archetypal criminals, source among Christian offspring, Buddhist tantric denials, Brahmanistic stoicism, and escapes from terrible truth, in realistic human and divine affairs, their spiritual dialectic, pondering on the reverse side various questions in regard to the higher and greater value system that inevitably becomes opposed from the external side, an apart departure from an intrinsic easiness and simple connective recognition of the master's very own depth and personal subjective consciousness, a sick, almost needless, and an inevitable revaluation of morality by and through the wearisome and less interested response from a once mutual and afterward negligible opposition. The appearance of some such thing upon almost every attempt of communication and correspondence with the external subject, in intention to give its share toward the humanity and artistic piece of work and proportionate part of the world's magnum opus, while however brilliant and brightly bestowed such a thing might be, yet upon the restoration and deceased recollection of the power, the artistic might and thought, if it be conscious and possible of doubtful appearance, there so it begins, the great master enters with his subject the profound remuneration, catalytic reorganization, shuffling and disembodying disembowelment, done so and taken into unfortunate action the lamentable responsibility of the weakly moral human subject, if through a natural course and ultimate progression of merited ends are once met. The tragic result of the performative transaction would leave the powerfully moralistic human subject with his will, representation, noble genius as negated, dismissed, and categorically discarded, cast out into the unknown abyss of confusion, storm fronts, and palpable disarray. The question of just how the inevitable process and possible duration of the subjective negation might be decreased, lost, and diminished. The requirement might verge on a near tantamount necessity of godly prudence, wisdom, and art, intellect and genuine thought, quickness and beauty, superb formation of grace. Do not permit the negative to overcome. The pessimism in its quick defeat lies necessarily aligned with the harmonious mutual recognition and positive communication within the world and the human subject's greater understood surrounding, to eventually become permitted logically and effectively sound enough to state, "We are the ones. It is as it is, freed, abolished, emancipated, liberated from the clutches of the once massive multitude of angered, embittered, and terrifyingly fearful and insecure folksmen." Such a condition has once come to rise. Such a condition has then come to its defeat. Now we revel in ourselves without the once almost permanent threat of intelligible negation and artistically genuine dismissal. We come alive with the dignity, virility, genius, and nobility that lies deep within and upon the head of all and every fortunate, healthy, and sound soul, mind, spirit, thrust forward and sentenced before into the world. In the end of the original lamentation, affirmation of the upright human race. July 3, 2010. 7/24/2010. I feel the need to seek and to find the way to triumph and accomplish my everlasting desire to speak about or to write down some of these most strange and peculiar thoughts and ideas that are swirling around through my head. What an otherworldly oddity that it is as I perceive them. I will myself into this human form. I come into being from an outer space, and an extraterrestrial creation. The form of this human body is given its will in almost a freed and abolished matter, whereas the effect of this freedom and choice so determines the will to its rightful result, conclusion, and consequence. I feel that I may have mastered more closely the representative philosophies and harmonies of my existence, life in its causalistic order, chaos and beauty. Willed into being, upon birthright, there I appear eternally recurrent, in that particular position, in that particular spot of spatial birth and ethereal time, deep inside that womb, beginning from the end. A continuous birth and reformation, over and over again. Will that is likely free to do as it might please. However, it is this very freedom of will that directs, forms, and shapes the context, life, and events of the phenomenal human form's destiny, fate, and determination of subjectivity. As though upon birthright, the subject is given the capability to choose and decide its movements, based upon whatever motivation or stimulus that summons it upon. Then for each and every movement's ground decision, so made by the subject's will, is it motivated, transformed, and changed ever further toward a proceedingly and progressively more difficult, different and diverse path, that the subject's capabilities create for it a life story and autobiography of itself, probably nearly different and radically altered each and every time that the subject is willed and made manifest into its phenomenal and lifelong totality. That in itself is difficult to grasp. I would like to appreciate and ingratiate the philosophers throughout history, ancient, renewed, that delivered, progressed, presented, and supplicated, that made available the kind of data and information that gave birth and formed the inspiration for myself and all of the life that is willed objectively and dispassionately around. Karma, on the other hand, that is something rather difficult to apprehend more fully, to fall into the hand of a true conviction for its reality, which is in every case there, present and existence. Every movement for the subject grounds and determines for it an opposing, reactionary effect from the very cause that is the subject's movements. For most of the time, that reactionary response is subliminal, unfelt, subconscious. Likewise is the subject's very movement in the first place. Though it seems as though that for every action from the will that determines the objective, empirical, and external worlds to form a creative reaction of implicit or explicit response, it is that it seemingly takes almost 4 musical tones, beats, or waves in spatial time before the empirical slave-like willing response takes its course and completes its action. Such a thing is seemingly almost always an infernal sound to the ears. I especially refer most to those sensations of the ear, for such an organic sensation is undoubtedly the most beautiful and sublime to the subject, when that organic sensation becomes transformed through the means of artistic beauty and genuine representation, almost totally preferable through the means of music. So that perhaps it is without a doubt that the artistic vehicle of music affects the subjective listener so immediately and deeply, for all the successive moments of continuous pounds, bangs, and hammers in the ear throughout the day leave one much so damaged and incredibly harmed for the destructive tendencies throughout that day and amid its placative surrounding among the listener. July 24, 2010. 8/7/2010. Nature is rather subtle at times. We find the end result in pursuing knowledge and its relative effects will only produce further, for the subject, a tendency toward dubiousness, ambiguity, and profound lack of agreement, decision, and cooperation, in whatever part the objective matter is in regard to the subject's mind at hand. Looking deeply, we pursue and will diametrically bind ourselves to earning anything tangible, credible, and ultimately real. The accomplishment of this, as I stated, will produce nothing valuable, that is, importantly belonging to the subject in particular, for any of the insight that develops and rationalizes the mind toward eternal fluctuation and radical change, any such objects belonging to the substance of matter, no simple thing becomes permanent. At least this is in accordance with the thing's appearance, the reflection, the empirically objective perspective of whatever subject matter or object. Rather, it is the appearance of whatever object as eternal beforehand in the a priori known and noble state within the spiritual possessive mind of the pure subject that is knowable. The possibility of this archetype in its detached freeness and ideal composition is what affords the knowing subject a sensitive kind of value, worth, and morality that otherwise could not be present if it were for a lacking plethora of pluralistic individuation. Inside, deeply still, the ideal dimension affords an escape toward the freedom from the concrete, heavy, and evasive situation and condition within the realms of material reality. It is strange. The willing subject, upon waking, upon dreaming, upon dreamless sleeping states, will create for itself a various manifold reflection, objective manifestation, and apparent representation throughout the realm of this subject's knowing world. For the plentiful part of most human existence, the consciousness and awareness of these various things appear more placid, shallow, and artificial, especially while a deep searching willful subject enters into a state of understanding and spiritual dialectic with one and the other. This in itself, with time and comprehension, effectively transitions and rewards the deeply willing subject a half-hearted, empty, vain, and deficient feeling. In turn, it seems to consistently transmit, alter, and shift to a rounder, more general, more cynical, sinister perspective, out of the response and resolution for the vast multitudinous things its experience can afford for it, that in no way all intends the subject a sense of worth, value, meaning, and further affirmative masterful morality. Overall, in the developing progression of this state, the will in its ever more disillusioned subject grows deeper and stronger, effortlessly coming closer to consuming and falling into a bottomless abyss that inevitably trademarks and plants in the consciousness the penultimate milestone for the subject's original life, its fate, and its inevitably miserable destiny. We have come to regard this procession in relevance to our own discourse from our life and spirit. It appears there is a certain specific kind of morality that profoundly and excessively dampens, divisionally affects the greater and subjective knower in its lifetime existence sentence. The morality of this half-hearted, jealous, and vengeful subject is by no means developed from and commenced in the life stream by any pure noble blood, or creative healthy kind of way. Nevertheless, it is useless to consider giving any further credence and credibility to this very state, if it were not for the tantamount menagerie and loquacious embodiment and determinateness of that very material force, for every step of the way and every tick of the clock in the subject's lifetime experience. So, indeed, the state of this appears consistent and fluid, and must thereupon be taken with a grain of salt and dismissed, for no matter how great the attention span is, or how great the theoretical dissertation is given to the inferior moralist, the very morality of that fantastical and dreamy subject will all the more consistently and indirectly beg and intend itself to ultimately collapse, seek the downfall, to reciprocate and juxtapose, suffer and recommend the very elimination of that very fine and genuine prince-like subject knower. It is probably better to return toward the self in the end, for what occurs there is rather profound, it is mysterious and ultimately troublesome, yet a calm, purged, and solitary state and scenario for the wearisome seeker. However, there is always a return. It is this very return that occurs to us more evidently. We know this by the cause of a certain specific clue and mistake occurring throughout the various sources and substances within the world. It is this very return that subordinates the seeker-listener to a new kind of chain and effective cycle of transformative will. However, the procession likewise is a kind of determinately forced reciprocation, juxtaposition, and consistent internal recurrence of the knowing subject and the listener throughout the realms within the very dream. Now hearken the cause and credibility toward deja vu. In any event, it is all the more tragic that most of the cases, throughout whatever countries and centuries the will is in the subjective knower, that such a state intends to fluctuate in sensation, perception, and understanding, the knowledge of everything over time. The pain and suffering that occurs now is thereupon administered and experienced in a later and a posteriori sequence in the occurrence of pleasure and joyful sensation, etc. That for every freeing, abolished, and loose spirit that is planted and summoned within the will of the knowing subject, thereupon will undoubtedly inevitably create and manifest the subject's rightful and responsible effect, consequence, and predicament, whether it be perceived and felt through the various sensations of pain, of pleasure, or that bear an intelligible and rather kind effect upon the listener, or that it conceive of loud, obnoxious, and hammering noise, a chaotic storm of air pollution, and such, as the effect upon the listener, or the a priori simple reason that the subject wills something beforehand, and it is therefore through necessity, a determination of the will, that it causes the very effect to ultimately take its place, by reason and by logic, to balance out and harmonize the matter and substance at hand, within the subject's realms of total reality. Otherwise, it is this very reality that is more deeply considered and later convinced of as a dream, for every color that is apparent to the subject, for every shape, for every sound and motion, for every objectification of the subject's will. It occurs and appears as an end result and effect of the subject's subconscious memorial afflictions and affective desires to represent something for itself deep within the muddy hurdles and obscure obstacles that its life course and legend-like story are within the making. And the reality of this subject is without end in the long run. However, it is within an end for every mistaken spot and chance occurrence the very subject is given, albeit for every accidental death that occurs. It is true that the sensation and the understanding of knowledge and of the will that there comes about and makes itself evident through mistake and through an accident. However, for every chance and free spirit life that occurs, there is for the most part the subject that is given a free new chance opportunity to create something new for itself from the start and from all over again, to create a new kind of knowledge, a new kind of insight and determined character to take its course upon, channeling and flowing the methodical kernel and very mode throughout the infinite variety and course of its lifetime's tricks, scandals, deceptions, punishment and rewards, etc., that the subject's willing response undoubtedly undergoes, however long in its sequential time, but is more than known through experience. Nothing, no life, no substance, no intelligence, other than the very law of matter, was as eternal, so that the given subject as at last will be granted over for so short or for so long a time to bear for itself a beauteous, harmonious, and ultimately good fate, to inevitably change and ultimately transform itself through the means of its free will in the direction of rightful course toward a state of benevolence, in a charitable utilization of power, and wise utilization of knowledge, etc., so that perhaps the very cycle in its seemingly endless chain of cause and effect, birth and restoration, departure, suffering from death, etc., takes its place, that thereupon all vain striving, all futile suffering, the aimless hopes amid the lucid dreams of the listener will come to an end, delivering itself over toward a final resting place and burial ground that rightly presupposed the will from the start to intend the possible attainments and emancipate achievements towards such a positive thing, simply for this transcendent ideality seemed so nourishing, comfortable, loving, and ultimately real. August 7, 2010. 9/5/2010. Into the crisper of that old wizard rays. July 23, 2010. Decided to and attempted to drive to Las Vegas today. Made it as far as Bar Stowe. I decided to call it a day and head back because of the spontaneousness of the trip, and the coming lack of daylight and such things. Though definitely an airy, atmospheric, nostalgia-ridden drive it was. July 24, 2010. I've come to notice that where there are 3 or so things to look forward to and are hopeful to meet in time's reception, that I tend to feel more pleased or happy upon return. Whereas otherwise, without a list of joyful actions to perform or receive, I tend to then brood in a typical depression and tragic pessimism, which in actuality tends to encapsulate and engulf the vast majority of my time in this existence. July 26, 2010. Rare appearances, at a point of no return, inevitable darkness, manifold decay, fully raised once more from this bleakest frozen midnight grave, misery and the chance opportunist effects, yet only in faith and belief. Ha! We will to reverence nevertheless. August 16, 2010. Recorded a pretty great epic piece today on the piano. I was feeling rather inspired during the whole musical process. Imperium Romanum Maximum, Parts 1 and 2. August 18, 2010. I might be healthier than I'd imagined these days. August 20, 2010. I feel I should intend my death to be a most noble death, a transformative shift from negatively determined character. I can only hope that such a thing becomes this way. August 25, 2010. I was seemingly forever attempting to prove to the world the utter insanity and fear that my human condition was in, and how the circumstances that I was experiencing were like. I was almost totally sure this complete cry and plea for most marginal help will go unnoticed and unseen, as is by the will of my almighty and sickliest Creator. August 25, 2010. Feeling a bit better today. The world isn't so bad after all. The dust from the storm settles. For now, there is peace. August 26, 2010. I have been treated rather well today. So many events have reciprocated past tensions and devilish, luminous fears. I only wish now to pay gratitude to the eternal spirit that is responsible for this release. August 27, 2010. That once in a lifetime experience, a mothering woman that arrives in restoration of a wounded, morbid, and ultimately dying character, only to inevitably end in a collapse in failing misapprehension of mutual understanding. Might such opportunity ever come again, for a most particularly lost, decadent, and tragic state of mind, spirit, and body. August 29, 2010. An abundance of communicative subject matter, and a necessity to become explained. Thoroughly difficult, inquisitive, yet utterly special and unique. One day I will begin most completely the near total statement of my course, inevitably to furnish what is positively desired, likewise suffered, in an absolute historical and autobiographical preservation. September 2, 2010. Sensing for the right time, toward a stormfront and blitzkrieg total war, an undeniable momentum, a supreme sonical fury, we become captivated, born and released, once more in time, in such gravitational thrust and distorted counter effect, lost in the twist. September 3, 2010. I'm arriving toward the conviction that at times I appear nobler and more superior to my Creator and very Lord itself, that there exists an absolute antithesis to his very ignobility within the character of my own will, which, knowing myself, is rather difficult to perceive. Otherwise, all the tumultuous pain and so-called meaningless suffering appears by cause of a totally unknowable and mysterious past life, and a need for such ideas explanation does not even suffice for its very validity, or that by now it in this life has already become so clear and completely convincing. September 5, 2010. Sometimes everything becomes so real once again, organic, blood, and heart-driven, apart from most the habitual need to behold fear and manifest it, to deliver a state of ignorance to the slave moralist, so as not to experience that most fatal yet routinely typical affection of my character in its condemnation and judgments into the pits of that very undesirable slave. The only question is, am I truly ever to find love in my own reflection, or is it only found within? September 5, 2010. 9/5/2010 too. Sometimes it seems as though that it could be impossible to cast a judgment upon the philosophical matter of a subject, whatever it may be, objectively speaking, where it is heard that the subject in particular cannot, even by means of the knower, become known and rendered completely, nobly, and officially enough, for the very subject matter in question appears to the knower in almost an absolutely unknowable, dubious, mysterious, and preponderous state. But it is by cause of this that makes evident to the philosopher the notion that this very dubiousness, mysteriousness, and strange ambiguity that causes the subject to become ever the more incomprehensible to its human nature is in fact due to, in particular, by cause of subjective ignorance, a level or degree lacking in knowledge, power, and experience, however varied it is, and by cause of the subject's newborn fear and nightmarish agony toward the very luminous and overwhelming question in hand. It is not passed over, left unanswered by means of a better knowledge or better insight into the thing itself, but rather it is left unrefined, desolate, and vacuous, for the subject of potential knowing simply cannot afford a credible level or degree of judgment, condemnation, or appraisal for the thing that is truly in question. Henceforth, within the particular willing form, and given character of more modestly and intelligibly knowing human, the reflection towards such a nature inevitably brings forth a birth and capability toward approving or condemning the experience of the nature, and to project toward the question, out of confidence, esteem, or of knowledge of the subject, a sense of fulfillment, entitlement, government, and overall meaning that otherwise could not be found, furnished and done so, if it were not for the becoming experience, knowledge, and rationalization of its very meaningful and symbolical affection. And in totality, it appears that this affection is taken form and shape by the intelligible knower, transcended forth into the imagination, and further behind into the memory, of which thus affords to the knower a greater capability and sense of skill toward objectively apprehending the subject, and to ultimately decree a mark and designation of affirmation or denial, or of approval or condemnation, either in relation to its very own character, which happens ever the more often with the subject of lesser genuine morality and personal driven spirits, or not in relation to itself, but instead rather in toward a freed and abolished embodiment of the inquisitive form, with the knower that tied in and connectively apprehended the very question in hand. thus giving to itself a certain sense of wonder, bewilderment, gazing at an incomprehensible refinement of such a subject that once was beforehand in a state and condition of seemingly absolute questioning. September 5, 2010. 9/15/2010. It is present in a most perpetual state of melancholy despair, broken decadence, and empty degeneration. There it exists, in an eternally symbolical question, becoming evoked, called upon, out of this necessity to be both clarify and to categorize the question in accordance with its very own truth. Something special, a thing most valuably cherished, gone, departed, ever the more deeply, toward bleakest state of blackest abyss, while undergoing to pull out from, in order to breathe, perhaps to perceive once again a spiritual life form. Is it all possible? Might this just arise? Might the fear extinguish the eternal particular of this canonical masterpiece? The very state, in various evocations of fear, a highly sensitive government, a most peculiar form of organism, so readily despised by conflict, affliction, and passive-aggressive half-hearted hatred, the world, seeming forever possessed by sickliness and profound weakness, once characterized forth, levelling excessively, most radically increased persuasion, as the knowledge and power of its very existence becomes rationalized and declared in ever more baffling, perplexive, and mystifying states. Trick-laden, crafty, and poisonous, a course of ocean, an ambiguous world, that every known subject within light of sensation and perception, mutual benevolence, for the most part reflective, yet rarely easily felt or understood, to find in itself, to look deeper into the very intellect, as for now, in its representative state, to behold a very stark provision of derelict confusion, ineffable mystery, and alternately willed egoism, as though the knowable universe were nothing more than a lie and ill-fated deception, within more passing of time, to become ever the more real and more exposited of light, spirit, and essence within these darkest tunnels of spiritual manifestation, as though it might be released, freed therewith, in a fated deliverance, by now and up to this point, for the great decadence, commonplace in its very state of mind, that appears to have grown ever so old, ever the more ancient and wise, yet so delicately deceased, terrified grief and manifold potential, advantage and utility, not even necessary, confusion to deliberate, the very thing in question, to be or not to be. It was said, as though the grand principality between two super-states existed, East and West, Schopenhauer or Nietzsche. Their two doctrines stood righteous, triumphant, and most honorable, held in virtuous achievement to the end of time. The denial of the will to live, or affirmation of this very thing, together in an artistic creation, a dual monistic fusion of two very distinct life forms, through reason, through trial and error, in a very amorphous validity, fluctuate reality and curious concretive truth. In evidence between passage and movement, either the particular may serve toward a justification of every subject that perchance comes into essential mercurial and spiritual reflection. September 15, 2010. 9/29/2010. It needed to happen spontaneously, eventually. At the most difficult crossroad in this life, confusion in symbology, an apparent endless objectification of a particular will, one that seemed, no, more than likely was, condemned, judged, absolutely disapproved, sentenced into its everlasting hell infernal, rushing tides, blistered moans, agony and pain, spasmic occultic science, coming back, only for completion, and infinity, saddened with tragedy in this molecular observation, for life and chance this time did not succeed. Went so far, however, gave everything absolute effort, yet met with derelict intolerance and cold abandonment, probably for illusory stupidity. Now, in the deadest end, rest in peace, thou truest and forever wisest Master. September 29, 2010.